Hi, I'm Danielle Dufault, and you're watching Animalogic. Dinos ruled the Earth for over 150 million years. But after the asteroid and out of their ashes, the mammals took over. How did we pull that one off?
After all, we weren't the only survivors. Reptiles, insects, arachnids, amphibians, fish, and even some dinos survived. They were the ancestors of all the animals alive today.
So what made us special? And could we ever lose that crown? To answer those and many other questions, I chatted with my friend Steve Brusatte. He's the scientist who literally wrote the book on the rise and reign of mammals.
I'm Steve Brusatte. I am a paleontologist, and I study dinosaurs, I study mammals, I study birds, and I am a professor at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I love to communicate science and especially to write books about fossils.
But let's start from the beginning. Mammals didn't arise out of thin air after the non-avian dinosaurs died out. Our lineage goes way back. And there was a time before the time of dinos when our ancestors and relatives were the biggest and meanest dudes on the planet.
These were the early synapsids, legendary animals like the Dimetrodon, which is a classic toy people mistakenly got in a dinosaur action figure bag. But it's actually more closely related to rats and whales than to Stegosaurus. Cotylarhynchus, which was an early terrestrial herbivore, but with a super tiny head, which likely made them a little bit slow. And the saber-toothed Gorgonopsids, the apex predators of the Permian. Check out our episode about these amazing beasts after watching this episode.
Just like it's important to understand the evolutionary roads that led to today's mammals, it's also important to know where we as individuals came from. I just did it, and it completely recontextualized and solidified my ideas of who my ancestors were. And it only took 2 minutes and cost $29, thanks to MyHeritage DNA. MyHeritage has 42 ethnicities and over 2,000 geographic regions, so everyone gets extremely detailed information about their DNA. The test comes like this. You register it, do the test, and mail it. And a couple of weeks later, you get the results. So it's been a couple weeks since we've done the DNA test, and we've been anxiously waiting the results. But we have them. We're gonna find out what I am. From everything that I know and my family history, I think that I'm a quarter Welsh, a quarter Polish, and a little more than a quarter French, and a little bit of First Nations Cree here in Canada. Moment of truth, I get to press the big button. Let's go. Wait, what? Okay, 27.5% Scottish and Welsh. That's about right. I said a quarter Welsh. 22.4 English. Okay, interesting. Well, like the Welsh side probably has a lot of English mixed in too, but that makes like half. 14.3% European, okay, 9.1% Germanic, and 26.7% of 8 more ethnicities. This is kind of crazy. Yeah, I'm actually kind of impressed. And thanks to its ever-growing database, you might find relatives you didn't even know you had. MyHeritage has committed in its privacy policy never to sell or license genetic data, so you can rest easy knowing that your data is in safe hands. You can get your own test by clicking the link in the description. And if you use the promo code ANIMAL1, you'll get the bundle package for the same price as the test. So for just $29, you get the test, free shipping, 30-day free trial to all the website features, and the Ancient Origins feature. It's an amazing deal, much more affordable than other DNA test kits. So don't just settle for a basic DNA test. And while you wait for results, let's go back to the evolutionary adaptations of these incredible animals. When our relatives, the synapsids, were at their peak, then came the Great Dying, also known as the Permian Extinction event, when up to 90% of all animal species disappeared.
This created a sort of power vacuum that dinosaurs quickly filled as they grew larger and took over the world. But they weren't alone. Somewhere in the shadows, scurrying around their legs, our ancestors were alive and well. They just looked a lot less impressive than the terrible lizards we know and love. Cretaceous mammals looked mostly like the type of creature that you'd find hiding in a burrow or inside the belly of an owl. But why don't we know anything about them? We asked Steve to help us understand why we know so little about our mammalian ancestors.
The dinosaurs, I think, have a better PR agent than a lot of these fossil mammals. I think in large part, the dinosaurs, T-Rex, Triceratops, they were just so sublime and so spectacular, and we're so familiar with them. They're such iconic animals because they're big, because they're brash, and they get the headlines. And then they suddenly went extinct, most of them at least, and then mammals basically took their place. Mammals became the top predators and top plant eaters and most diverse animals on land in many ecosystems. But those fossil mammals are not household names. And hopefully through some of the books, I've written and other things that maybe I'm trying to give them a bit more publicity. But I think when it comes down to it, the last dinosaurs like T-Rex and Triceratops, they were huge. They were iconic animals. The mammals that survived the asteroid were small. They were little mouse-sized, rat-sized things. And then they had to build a new world out of that. So they're probably not the kind of fossils that are going to grab people's attention right away.
Yeah, it gives me chills just thinking about it, really. But back then, we didn't have that same level of diversity in terms of body forms and niches and whatnot. And they were all, as you said, they were small generalists. So in your book, you mentioned that dinosaurs didn't get very small and that mammals didn't get very big. There's almost like a line that they couldn't cross. Why was that line there? Why was there this weird discrepancy between them? Was there some kind of optimization happening, or?
It's a great question. And I don't know if there's some greater, metaphysical reason, if there was some constraint on dinosaur size or mammal size, or whether it just came down to the contingencies of evolution, of how things have just unfolded on Earth over time through luck and through chance and through species adapting to their own environments, and that adding up over time into these grand evolutionary stories. I think what happened with dinosaurs and mammals, to take a step back, is we have this idea that the dinosaurs had their day and then they died. And then the mammals took over, and now the mammals have their day, and we're in the age of mammals, and we're a mammal. And, that story is generally true. There we go. There are the mammals that truly rule the world. So, in a way, that story is, it is generally true. The dinosaurs were the dominant land animals for a very long time in terms of the diversity of dinosaurs, the different groups, the different diets and sizes and behaviors. They were the top predators, the top plant eaters, and in many food chains, and filled many niches, and that persisted for about 150 million years. Now it's mammals that hold those keystone niches in many ecosystems on land, and it's mammals that are the biggest land animals, and it's mammals that are the top predators and biggest plant eaters in most ecosystems. That's true. But what's not true is that the dinosaurs died and then the mammals evolved to take their place. Dinosaurs died, except for birds, and this is the best time, of course. I got to do it. I'm sorry to plug the next book.
Yes, of course.
We can talk about this. Comes out in April in Canada and the U.S. and in June here. We can talk about birds. But
that's so exciting.
Dinosaurs did survive the asteroid as birds. All the other ones died. But mammals survived the asteroid.
Let's take a look at the mammals from the Cretaceous and the features that helped them thrive and survive.
Most of these mammals were smaller than a rat. Their tiny, flexible bodies helped them hide in holes and under vegetation. They had a great sense of smell to find food and mates and to detect predators. They were likely nocturnal and ate anything they could find, from small invertebrates to roots and seeds. But they also lived in moist forests that broke down bones quickly, which means that we don't have a lot of fossils of these species. So we have a pretty good general idea of what they looked like and how they behaved, but we don't have a complete picture of all the species that lived alongside T-Rex and other dinos.
We have to be very humble in the face of the fossil record because we know the fossil record is biased, and we know that, generally speaking, it's easier to preserve something big as a fossil. Maybe not a whole skeleton, but a vertebra, a limb bone of something the size of T-Rex. It's just going to withstand the rigors of time.
Can you tell me why?
Simply because of the size, really, because something, you think of a T-Rex, the size of a bus. Its thigh bone is basically my size. Something like that is just much more robust, much more sturdy. It's going to be much easier to bury that in sand or mud and have it turn into a fossil and then withstand tens of millions of years of erosion and the earth moving around and everything than, say, a little mouse or a little sparrow or something like that. That's just the general fact of the fossil record. However, there are these places, these spectacular sites where entire ecosystems get buried all at once, oftentimes because it's a volcano that erupts and buries them in ash, or there's some kind of flash flood or something. And in those cases, we can get very small animals preserved. And a lot of these famous feathered dinosaurs from China are a great example. That's why the feathers are preserved. They're locked in stone because they were buried so quickly by these volcanoes. But alongside those feathered dinosaurs are a lot of the best skeletons of mammals from the age of dinosaurs. And you have little mammals, of mice and shrews that are found alongside those feathered dinosaurs. And I think what those ecosystems tell us is that there would have been overlap between mammals and dinosaurs. It's not that all mammals were tiny and all dinosaurs were big. There was an area where a middle ground where they would have overlapped, and there were plenty of dinosaurs, a lot of these raptor dinosaurs, for instance, that were the size of pigeons, of crows. But what we don't have are any mammals that are bigger than a house cat living with dinosaurs during the Triassic, Jurassic, or Cretaceous. And we don't have any dinosaurs that are really much smaller than, say, like a pigeon or something like that. We don't have any dinosaurs that are the size of a shrew. And I think we would know that by now. We would have some fossils, we would have some teeth. We would, in these ecosystems where we find the tiny mammals as fossils, we'd be finding the tiny dinosaurs. So there is an overlap, but I do think generally, we know Mesozoic mammals never got anywhere near as big as the biggest Mesozoic dinosaurs, and we know that Mesozoic dinosaurs never got anywhere near as small as these tiny little shrew-sized mammals. So there is something to it that was more or less the equilibrium for many tens of millions of years.
Then came the asteroid. In a few hours, the world changed forever. An asteroid larger than Mount Everest crashed into the coast of Mexico at about 20 kilometers per second. The explosion was billions of times the power of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. Those within 10 kilometers were immediately pulverized. Then, a massive heat wave set the world on fire. Pulverized rock got kicked up into the atmosphere and then returned to the Earth in the shape of molten glass. It doesn't seem like it would have been survivable, but somehow our ancestors persevered. Life, finds a way. But what did their future hold for them?
Another thing I'd love to touch on, what was the world like after the asteroid? And what did animals eat? And why couldn't small dinosaurs eat whatever mammals were eating?
Boy, this is one of these questions that we can let our imaginations run wild a little bit because, of course, we don't have a huge amount of direct evidence of those first ecosystems living right after the asteroid hit, but we do have evidence in the geological record of the wildfires that would have engulfed the world. We have the charcoal and the burnt wood that they left behind. We have evidence of the tidal waves, the huge tsunamis that tore through the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. That's where the asteroid hit. We have rock layers where there are these tsunami deposits with boulders the size of houses ripped up by these waves. In the rocks, we have these glass bullets that would have fallen from the sky. When the asteroid hit, it would have liquidated all of this stuff. It would have gone up into the atmosphere and then fallen back down. And as it fell, this stuff was really hot. It would have cooled as it fell, eventually forming glass, but that would have superheated the atmosphere, hotter than an oven. And so these are things we have direct evidence for it.
Right.
And so we know that these things were happening immediately after the asteroid. So it would have been apocalyptic. The big thing was that you had the wildfires, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, all that hot glass raining down from the sky. That would have happened in the minutes, the hours, the days, maybe the weeks after the asteroid. But the true killer, and that's not to say those things didn't kill, they would have killed a lot of animals.
No kidding.
But the true killer was what happened in the months and years after, because all of that dust and dirt and grime from the collision of the asteroid, all of the soot from the wildfires, the smoke, went up into the atmosphere, and it would have covered the earth in darkness. It would have plunged the earth, these thick clouds of dust and dirt and grime and smoke. And maybe it just lasted for a few years, maybe it lasted for a few decades. It's hard to tell for sure from the rock record. But it would have been essentially a global nuclear winter. And the earth went dark and cold, and there wasn't sunlight. Plants could not photosynthesize.
Right. I can imagine they would be the first to go.
And the plankton in the oceans at the base of the food web could not photosynthesize, and they died. And that's why the food chains really collapsed on land and in the water. Now, plants came back eventually because seeds can last a long time in the soil. But there would have been at least a few years, and maybe up to a few hundred years, or maybe even a few thousand years, hard to know for sure, where there were no big land plants, there were no forests. And so that is at the root of why so many species died, because you have this collapse of ecosystems on land. And the best way to survive is if you were not part of those ecosystems that relied on plants for food. So let's say you were a part of an ecosystem that used detritus at the base of the food chain. So basically organic gunk, decaying stuff. There's plenty of food webs today where the base of the food web is not photosynthesizing animals or plants, but detritus.
Okay.
And that would have been a great time if you were in a detritus food chain, because there would have been all this dying stuff, and that could have lasted you a few years until at least some of the plants started to grow again. And indeed, the 25% of species that survive when the asteroid hit are things like crocodiles and turtles and a lot of these freshwater fishes that were parts of these detritus-based food webs in rivers, in lakes, and in ponds. So that was one of the keys to survival. In addition to being small, growing fast, reproducing fast, just having a fast-paced life so you could get through it. And ultimately, that's probably why most dinosaurs died. Most dinosaurs were pretty big. No, they weren't all the size of T-Rex, but even if you were just the size of, let's say, a golden retriever or a person, it would take you at least a few years to grow from a baby into an adult. That's a real problem if the whole world is plunged in darkness. You would need food.
Yeah, your needs would be that much bigger. You would need that much more nutrients for that growing body.
And time, the time it would take. You'd have to navigate a few years from going from a baby to an adult, and then you'd have to reproduce at the end of that. And you can just see how the odds of survival of both an individual and their species would be really harsh for these bigger animals. But if you were small, if you grew fast, if you reproduced fast, if you could eat lots of different stuff, you could be flexible, but especially if you could eat this detritus, this dead decaying stuff.
Had stomachs of steel.
Exactly. And that's the ticket to survival. And I think that, I like to think of it as it's like the mass extinction, the asteroid plunges the Earth into this crazy casino. It's now just a game of chance. And you're sitting at the poker table and you got to play that game with whatever hand of cards you've been dealt. There's not enough time to change, to adapt through the normal processes of natural selection. Of individuals being fit to their environment over the generations. You have to confront the asteroid and this nuclear winter with whatever cards you're holding. If you are small, that's good. If you're big, that's not good. And so really the rules of the game change during these mass extinctions. And species have to get through. They have to endure. That's the key to survival. Then once the world starts to heal and things settle down, then kind of the normal background rules of evolution come back into play. But survival is the key.
So yeah, the key for our ancestors was to be super adaptable, eat lots of different things, grow fast, mate young, parental care, and probably die fast. These were short lives, but as long as they managed to have babies before they died, their lineages were guaranteed to survive at least one more generation. This was true for other groups too, of course. Small birds, freshwater amphibians and reptiles, small lizards, they all survived the dark years thanks to their ability to hide, to eat anything, and to mate quickly. One of the key foods that helped all these poor, grimy animals survive was seeds. They're nutritious and last a long time before going bad. So even when nothing was growing, old seeds could sustain animals for a while.
Absolutely. So I should say I do tell that story in the story of birds.
Oh.
Yes. It's actually a whole chapter.
Spoilers.
The book covers the origin of birds from dinosaurs and how feathers evolved and wings and how these dinosaurs took to the skies and became birds. And then it follows the evolution of birds over the 150 million years of time from their origin to today. And the end Cretaceous extinction is a big part of it. There's a whole chapter basically on why birds were the only dinosaurs to survive the asteroid. And I think it's a similar thing. It comes down to the hand of cards they were holding. What we have to be aware of is that there were lots of dinosaurs that had feathers and wings that died out. There were lots of birds that died out too. There was an enormous diversity of birds living with T-Rex and Triceratops. Most of those birds died, maybe even 90% or more died. Only a few birds survived. And the birds that died were the more, what we would now recognize as the more primitive ones, the ones with teeth and big claws and long tails. There were a bunch of birds like that living up till the moment the asteroid hit. The ones that survived were the modern style birds, the ones that have beaks instead of teeth, the ones that have short tails and a fan of feathers at the end of their tails for aerodynamic purposes, that have bigger wings, bigger chest muscles to power those wings, that grew really fast, that grew from a baby into an adult within a year or less.
This sounds like the key.
Exactly. So you can kind of see where I'm going, the hand of cards that these particular birds had. Now, of course, we're looking at this from the vantage point of our current time. We know what lived and what died, and maybe we're judging this after the fact. But the fact is that a bunch of birds died. Every non-bird dinosaur died. The only ones that survived was this very small group of fast-growing, warm-blooded, beaked birds that could eat seeds with those beaks. That's a big argument that people have made, and I think there's a lot of truth to it. If you could eat seeds, that would be your ticket to surviving. You could at least nourish yourself and maintain yourself during those months and years when the nuclear winter was happening. It would just be a way through.
These early mammals are some of the most interesting animals to research right now. And the many ways scientists are figuring out how those long-gone mammals lived is almost miraculous.
This is something we're trying to understand. And so my research group here at the University of Edinburgh, we've been studying a lot about the extinction and about the mammals that survived and how placental mammals then took over the world. And, we've been using a lot of different techniques to study these surviving mammals and these pioneering mammals in the Paleocene, the interval after the asteroid. And one of the things we've been doing is trying to understand how they grew and how they reproduced. So this is a lot of work that Greg Funston, who is a great Canadian scientist who many of you guys out there know. Greg is a postdoc here, and we did this project. Greg published this in Nature in 2022, a fantastic paper he did as a young scientist, where we were looking at the histology, thin sections of teeth and of bones, counting the growth rings in the bones, but teeth have daily lines of growth when a mammal tooth is forming, including our own teeth. And we also did chemical sampling. There's certain elements that we know in modern mammals change as a mammal grows. And in particular, zinc and barium, they change a lot, and they especially change during two key moments in a mammal's life. The first is birth, and then the second is when a mammal's weaning. So maybe not so much a moment, but that period of time where they're getting away from drinking their mother's milk, starting to eat other food.
Okay.
So Greg was able to look at these chemical signals in teeth of a bunch of mammals that were living soon after the asteroid hit. And what he was able to tell in this project that he led, that he did here in Edinburgh, was that some of these Paleocene mammals living right after the asteroid, they were growing like modern day placentals. They were giving birth to babies that gestated in their mother's wombs for 7 months. And those babies were born at pretty big size, many, many kilos, not little pipsqueaks, but hefty babies. And then they drank their mother's milk for about 1 month, and then they weaned and they started eating their own food. And within a year or so, they were reproducing themselves.
That's fast. Okay.
First of all, it's remarkable that those signals, these chemical signals, are still in the teeth of these mammals that are more than 60 million years old. It's amazing. We were shocked when we got those results, and we checked them and double checked them. And really that novelty of finding these chemical signals in teeth that are so old, that's one of the main reasons why this got into nature. But the important thing really is that what we think is that giving birth to babies that can grow in the relative safety of the womb for a long time, that means they can be born at a more advanced state. They can be bigger, they can be more developed, and they have a leg up already from when they're born. So when it comes to surviving the extinction, we don't really know yet if Mesozoic mammals, living with T-Rex and Triceratops, were growing like that or not. We do know, though, is that some of the first mammals living afterwards were. So whether being able to give live birth to big babies helped mammals survive the asteroid, hard to say, but definitely it was part of the reason why they were able to thrive so well afterwards, and we think why they were able to get so big. And there's a whole host of fossil birds. We didn't even get into some of these absolutely jaw-dropping, crazy, weird birds that lived after the asteroid. So birds made it through, some birds, all the other dinosaurs died. We think of mammals taking over from the dinosaurs. They did. But birds, they really gave mammals a run for their money. They still do. But there's a lot of extinct birds that basically were born-again dinosaurs. There were terror birds that stood, like 8 feet tall and had these big, sharp, nasty, pointed beaks, big claws on their feet that were the top predators in South America for millions of years. They were basically like a small version of a T-Rex, but not even that small. These were, imagine a bird that's like 8 foot tall with this enormous sharp beak.
Still technically dinosaurs.
When you look at one of these things, you can see it. This is a top predator dinosaur born again after the asteroid. There were giant plant-eating birds, Moas of New Zealand. These things stood 10 feet tall, and they lived until a few hundred years ago. It was humans who killed off the Moas on New Zealand. New Zealand was the last dinosaur-dominated ecosystem in the world. Mammals barely got there, just a few bats.
Right.
It was birds that held on, birds that became supersized. The Moas were the big plant eaters at the base of the food chain, filling the Triceratops niches. You had these Hass eagles, the biggest eagles of all time. They were like the T-Rex equivalent at the top of the food chain. It was a dinosaur-dominated world, the last outpost of the dinosaur empire, persisting until only 700 or 800 years ago, until the first humans got to New Zealand.
Of course, we had to step in and ruin everything.
And that to me is wild. It would be like finding some area of the world today, some island somewhere where there's people in togas who are swearing fealty to Caesar and cheering on lions and gladiators.
So my final question is pertaining to the animals that we've got here today and the survivors and like the patterns in which, our mammals today have evolved. So in a really dark scenario, if another asteroid were to hit the Earth, or some other catastrophic event were to take over the Earth, do you think that mammals would win again? Do you think that our mammals today would find a way to thrive and survive, or at least some of us?
Part of it, I think we have to be honest, is that it's a bit unpredictable. It's hard to know from the start. Chance and circumstance play a role when everything changes so quickly. And it's like you're playing a game of poker. You got your hand of cards, but there's a bit of randomness in what cards you have and who you're competing with and so on. So I think we wouldn't know for sure. And that's part of the game. Ultimately, I would think it would be those species that are small, that grow fast, that can eat a lot of different foods, that can hide away easy. So things like mice and rats and pigeons and a lot of these animals that we know in our world today are just really adaptable, that can thrive in the darkness, in the filth, in the chaos. That I would place my money on them, and I would also place my money on us. I think, would 8 billion humans get through an event like that? No, but I think we would have the ingenuity and the adaptability to find a way to make it through. But I hope it never comes to that. I hope this hypothesis is never tested in the real world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Steve's books are full of amazing facts and stories of some of the most incredible animals to ever live. If you enjoyed this chat, check them out.
So we have The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which tells the story of dinosaur evolution and also my own story of studying dinosaurs and how I became a paleontologist. Then I did The Rise and Reign of the Mammals, and that's the story of mammals from their humble origins alongside the dinosaurs to the modern day. And now the next one again will be the story of birds. This is the UK cover. The US and Canada won't be a bit different, but this will be out soon, all about
Beautiful.
bird origins and evolution. These are pop science books. They're meant for the public. They're not academic books. I'd really try to write them in a way that can reach people broadly. And they're the kind of books I hope that when I got into the field, when I really became obsessed with fossils, is when I was a teenager, and it was through reading books by Stephen Jay Gould and Bob Bacher and Mike Benton and Peter Ward and a lot of these great pop science books that really got me into it. So I try to write these books to hopefully be able to communicate with the 15-year-old version of me. Ultimately, that's what I'm channeling.
Well, you're doing it.
Well, thank
Making
you.
a difference.
Mammals, from giant lizard-like weirdos to tiny dino snacks, to the largest animal to ever live. We have come a long way. All of our audience and most of the staff at Animalogic are mammals. And we're so glad our ancestors survived the dinos. Let us know if you liked this format and if you'd like us to bring you more interviews with some of the most interesting scientists in the world. So, what should we talk about next? Please let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for watching, and see ya! Don't forget to check out MyHeritage to see your genetic origins. Click on the link in the description and use promo code ANIMA1 to get your tests for just $29 and get free shipping, and a 30-day free trial to all the website features, including the amazing Ancient Origins feature.